Now, let's answer some of your questions on what exactly is going to happen in Parliament this week. It's only Thursday, and how MPs will deal with issues over the coming days. With me, Maddy Thimont Jack from the Institute for Government and the BBC's own reality check correspondent, Chris Morris. Can you believe it's only Thursday?
I know.
Right, let's start with this one. Nicola Rands on Twitter. Let's put this to you, because what happens if May's deal doesn't get the vote tomorrow, Maddy?
OK, so the agreement that Theresa May made with the EU last week was that if MPs do not approve a withdrawal agreement by the end of this week, then we've only got an extension to Article 50 until the 12th of April. Now, we know that MPs in the Commons do not want to leave without a deal. So the big question then is, what does Theresa May do to try and avoid having a no-deal exit on the 12th of April? And it seems likely that she'll have to go back to the EU, potentially ask for a longer extension to give us a bit more time to try and get a deal through.
Chris, at the moment, we don't know exactly what she's coming to the Commons with tomorrow, because as John Burke has made quite clear, he will not accept the same thing being brought back exactly as it was. So there's talk of separating this thing.
Yeah, there is, and that's because the statement agreed by EU leaders last week only spoke of passing the withdrawal agreement. It was very specific about that by the end of this week. It didn't mention the political declaration. So there's a thought, I suppose, that you could just approve that part of it, and that would meet the EU terms for the longer extension until the 22nd of May. But in UK domestic legislation, it says a meaningful vote has to include both the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration. And this may be a moot point anyway, because Labour seems determined not to vote for it. There may be a few rebels, but very few. But so the chances of, if that split were to happen, and we still don't know that, the chances of getting through are pretty slim.
Maddy, I think we will know by 5 what is being put forward tomorrow, but how legally difficult is it to separate those two bits of this?
Well, as Chris has said, if we want to ratify a withdrawal agreement, then we do need to approve both the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration. I think there is some debate about whether you can have the sort of approval separately and sort of have them in sort of phases, so that we can ensure we've got this longer extension from the EU, but have a bit more time to approve a political declaration. I mean, the thing to say is that we also need to pass domestic legislation to implement the withdrawal agreement, and there is discussion about using a clause in that bill to override the provisions in the EU Withdrawal Act, which is sort of the reason why we're going through this process at the moment, to just say that actually passing this domestic legislation is enough to ratify the deal. OK.
Question 2. This is a text from Jenny Ryan. No, it's not. It's an email, in fact, from Robert Kitching. I'm coming to Jenny in just a moment.
Don't worry, Jenny. We're going to get to you.
So, will the UK company and individual orders made with foreign suppliers before any Brexit leave agreement be honoured after any leave agreement on current agreed terms? I think I understand that. And you know the answer.
Well, I think I know what she's getting at. Oh, he's getting at. Sorry, it's not Jenny, is it? It's Robert.
Jenny's next.
So, obviously, companies, on whether they're in the UK, any other country around the world, want to honour the terms of an agreement. But on the other hand, they have to abide by the rules and regulations of the countries in which they operate. If we leave with no deal, there will be certain circumstances in which there will suddenly be things like tariffs imposed on goods. So you could say, theoretically, for example, a country with which the UK has a free trade agreement as a result of its EU membership, I'm thinking of some countries far away, South Korea, Japan, there could be goods already in transit which have been ordered in the last couple of weeks, which might arrive after the 12th of April. If we were to leave on the 12th of April and there were suddenly tariffs going to be imposed on those goods, then the terms, I think, would have to change, because the company bringing it in would have to pay the tariff. And I think most companies would then say to the people they're supplying to, I'm afraid those terms have changed, because the tariff regime has changed as a result of no deal.
Because if we're sending stuff from here abroad, there's going to be a moment in the days before where customs are going to have to be applied here.
There's uncertainty in both directions, but the questions specifically seem to be, will everything be the same? And the answer is potentially no, it won't.
Right. Now, at last, Jenny Ryan's question gets an airing. Maddy, can someone explain how Theresa May's resignation or not impacts on the terms and or acceptability of her agreement?
Well, I mean, this is obviously quite a political question, because last night Theresa May did say that she would resign if MPs supported the deal, and there would then be a leadership contest, and the Conservative Party would have a new leader. And it did seem to quite quickly persuade some of her backbench MPs to support the deal. I mean, beyond the politics, I think the thing to say is that there is still a whole nother phase of negotiations that we've got to go through in the EU.
Which is our future relationship.
Exactly, our future relationship. Theresa May has quite clearly lost quite a significant amount amount of support in her own party. And so I think what they're trying to get at is that actually, if we're going to, if we pass the deal and move on to the next phase, they want to have a leader that they can trust to go out and to deliver what they want.
It is politics, I know. But
well, I was going to say, in terms of the politics, I think it's worth saying her offer to resign, conditional on the agreement being passed, may have tempted more Conservative Brexiteers to say, OK, we'll support the deal. But on the flip side of that, if their intention is then to have a Prime Minister who they would see as a more pure Brexiteer, then the Labour Party MPs that she may need to attract to support her deal are going to be put off by the fact that she's going to go. So 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
This is one for you. This is one from Michelle Knox, who's emailed, for a managed no deal, please can you explain how Article 24 would work. Article 24. OK. Explain it.
Yeah, we talk about Article 50. That's the Lisbon Treaty. Yeah. Article 24 is Article 24 of GATT. That's the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade.
So we're talking about the WTO.
We're talking about the rules of the WTO. And that article says that if you have if a country has an agreement with another one, or an interim agreement to have a free trade agreement or a customs union, then you can not pay tariffs while that agreement is being implemented, if you like. The point about if we leave with no deal, there won't be an agreement with the EU. I mean, there's been some... I've seen quite a lot of stuff on social media, for example, saying we can force the EU to give us 10 years of tariff-free trade while we negotiate a deal in the future. And that isn't the case. That's not what GATT Article 24 says. It says you need to have an agreement in place.
We need to repeat this often, because it's an argument I hear from MPs and others who just say, oh, we've got 10 years. We have not, have we?
No, we haven't. The Prime Minister has said that publicly. So has the Secretary of State for International Trade. Yep. Liam Fox hardly shy about his opinions on Brexit. So it seems to me it's something which has been taken with a grain of truth and has been built up into something far more serious and far more far-reaching. And if you have no deal, Article 24 of GATT simply doesn't apply.
Right. I've got this one from Trevor Clark, who's emailed, will the government renew Europe 2020, particularly in light of numbers of scientists looking to work in Europe? You need to explain what Europe 2020 is.
Yeah, so it's a funding programme. So we get a lot of money from Europe 2020, so to go into universities and research projects. And I think the reason that I guess this question is being asked is that we are a net beneficiary from the EU under this programme. So we do get more money than we put in. And there's a big concern amongst some of the research communities that there won't be as much money available after we leave the EU.
Well, universities are very susceptible to this, aren't they?
Yeah, it is quite an important, sort of EU funding programme that we rely on. And so, I mean, in answer to the question, essentially, I mean, there is an element of it depends what we negotiate. The UK government has said that it does want to continue to take part in it. This was from its white paper last year. But I think for third countries normally, and Chris can correct me if I'm wrong, third countries normally, they can't normally partake where they are net beneficiaries, where they do get so much more money back. So I think there'll be quite a big question about the terms in which the UK can continue to participate in the programme. And
Europe 2020, as the name suggests, ends in 2020. It's this current 7-year budget programme. There's negotiations going on at the moment within the EU about the next 7 years. We're not really part of that negotiation because we are assuming we'll have left by then. We could pay to play to some extent, if you like. You pay in a bit to the EU budget to take part in these programmes. In the event of no deal, though, the government has said it would replace the money that people get from Europe with its own money. But anecdotally, a lot of universities, scientists and others are already saying we've seen the amount of money approved from things like Horizon 2020 going down because they think we're on the way out. OK. Now, this one from Northern Ireland, from Tanya. Is there some reason why Parliament can't use a preferential voting system to decide a way forward? She says it could be decided in one day. If only. But
I mean, there isn't a reason why they can't, and we're waiting to see what MPs are going to do with their day next week that they sort of set aside to take control once again.
Because everybody's saying last night, well, what a damp squib in the end, and an embarrassment for those who put it forward. But they're missing the point, because it's Monday where that
exactly. So yesterday was really about seeing the lie of the land. Let's see where some of the majorities fall at the moment. Let's start ruling out some options, and maybe if we take some of the ones that got the biggest majorities, or not majorities, sorry, the biggest number of votes. There were no majorities last night. the biggest sort of supports and actually do a different kind of voting system, potentially preferential voting, where you rank the options according to the sort of the order in which you like them, and then see whether we can have a last sort of option standing. So I would say there is no reason they can't do it. We're going to wait and see if that's what they choose to do. And in theory, you could do it in one day. I think the big question is, if we do end up with one option with a majority, will the government act on it, and will MPs be happy enough with it collectively to then support sort of any deal that might incorporate it going forward?
The other possibility, briefly, Simon, is you could combine two together. I mean, there's no rules here. We're making them up as we go along, if you like. But you could say, if you take the two options which got the most votes yesterday, you could say, well, how about an option where you plump for a permanent customs union and then put it to a referendum? You could have like a composite of the two put together.
Well, that's exactly the next question. Graham Clough, who says, is there any realistic way the Prime Minister's deal can be modified by, say, a Kenneth Clarke proposal, or are they incompatible? They're not, are they?
Well, they're not incompatible in the sense... Well, the political declaration, which comes with the withdrawal agreement, is non-binding. It has language in it which reflects the Prime Minister's desire not to be in a customs union because she wants to do independently trade deals around the world. But that's non-binding language. And the slight sort of Alice in Wonderland aspect to all of this is that many of the options that were discussed yesterday, staying in the single market, staying in the customs union, staying in bits of both of them, all of them are technically possible with Theresa May's deal, because the political declaration is not binding and doesn't give any precise direction of travel.
Right. Now, Mike Parrott has emailed from Northwood in London. He's cheekily asked two questions. We'll do number A first. On a customs union amendment, if passed, does this still need Mrs May's deal to pass?
So Mrs May's deal consists of two different aspects. We've just talked about the political declaration, and this is the sort of, high-level statement about what we want from the future relationship, and the EU is open to renegotiate. And as Chris has just said, pretty broad, customs union can fit within that. But the other aspect is the withdrawal agreement, and that deals with all of the withdrawal issues. So
that's
things
the
like
divorce.
Exactly,
that's the
it's
money,
the divorce, it's the money, it's citizens' rights, it's transition, it's the Northern Ireland backstop. And we need to pass that to ensure that we do not leave without a deal. So yes, you still need to pass a sort of form of Theresa May's deal. You could amend the political declaration to specifically say we do really want a customs union, but you do need to get a deal, and largely her deal, through the Commons.
Right, now, question B from Mike. If a no deal, what happens at the Irish border? Now,
we get this question a lot, don't we? And it's a really good question to which nobody wants to give you a clear answer for perhaps understandable political reasons.
The UK government said they wouldn't put up a border.
The UK government has said it will not have any checks at the border, which some people say, well, that'll be a smuggler's charter. And the answer is it will be an intelligence-led operation to make sure that people essentially are playing by the rules. What happens if they don't? Who goes in to check in a warehouse close to the border? Do you want to do that? Do I want to do it? Not really in that sensitive political environment. Similarly, the Irish government has said we don't intend to put up a border, but there are the laws of the land in Ireland are the laws of the European Union, and particularly on things like food and animals, there are very strict rules for how that kind of product gets into the single market. And if we leave with no deal, technically, suddenly, Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK will be outside the single market, and obviously Ireland is inside it. So that becomes a customs border and a border for rules and regulations as well. No one's going to wake up on the 13th of April and suddenly find barbed wire and men in caps. It's not going to be that kind of border, but there will have to be a process, I think, of working out how and where you check things. The Commission may say, well, actually, if you're not going to check on this land border, it's going to have to be checked somewhere in the Irish Sea. So it's going to be a complicated conversation. OK. We move on. This is from Brian Thompson, who describes himself as confused of Surrey. There are a lot of them. We're with you, Brian.
Yes, I know. How do we sign up? Now, he says, if we have a second referendum, what happens if the result is as inconclusive as the last one?
Well, I think this is one of the reasons why people don't want to have a second referendum, is because they're really worried that we're going to come back with something very close either way, and we're sort of going to be still in this sort of question. I mean, it really depends which way it falls. I mean, if you have sort of 52% remain, then there's an argument to say, right, well, we revoke Article 50 and we go on as usual. If we have 52% leave again, well, then I think people say, well, we'll continue to negotiate. But I think this is one of the reasons why people are concerned about having another referendum and don't know if it's really going to resolve some of the big questions that we're still grappling with.
Yeah, I mean, we know the country's split down the middle, and we're going to have to deal with that in one way or another for years to come. I mean, I think if there was a second referendum which voted leave again, politically, that would pretty much be it. Sure, you could have a campaign among those who currently argue for Remain to rejoin the EU, but I think 2 leave votes in 2 referendums is probably enough.
Yep.
If it was a narrow victory for Remain, well, best of 3.
Or not.
Or not.
Now, this one from Michael Roberts from Blythe in Northumberland. Why is no deal being described as our default position? Surely the default position is our starting position before any changes are made, which he says is remain as we are in the EU. No deal has also been rejected by Parliament, so this can't happen. He's got a point.
Well, no, he
has got a point. I know he's wrong, but I know he's got a point.
The reason is we've already changed, because the law has already changed. By triggering Article 50, European law has changed. It set the clock ticking to the end of the Article 50 period. We now know it's been pushed a little bit ahead from tomorrow, but not by very much. And UK law's also changed. I mean, the date of the 29th of March was written into law. Now it's either the 12th of April or the 22nd of May written into law. So the legal default position is not remain as we are. The legal default position is you leave, deal or no deal. And if you have no deal, that's what happens.
Right. Final question. An email from Willie Wilson. If we eventually end up with the Norway option, do we still have to pay all of the £39 billion divorce bill?
It kind of goes back to what I was saying about the fact that we've got a withdrawal agreement and a political declaration. And so, you know, the withdrawal agreement is essentially saying that what we're doing, the sort of £39 billion divorce bill, is about paying both for EU membership during transition, which is an integral part of the withdrawal agreement to allow us to transition from our current relationship to the future one. But it's also, we're signing up to pay for some of the obligations that we took on as EU members. So I don't see that sum changing. But what we will have to do...
So it's a yes?
Yes. But also what I would say is, yeah, that's a symbol. Start with a yes. But what I would say is that if we take on the Norway option, then we will continue to be paying into the EU for different programmes that we're part of and the sort of obligations that we take on as being part of the single market. I mean, there will be more. We will be paying more money to the EU going forward.
Yes or no?
Yes,
lovely.
A definite yes. And don't forget, if we leave with no deal, eventually you've got to go back to the table with the EU to organise the future. And one of their first questions is going to be, where's our £39 billion?
Chris, Maddy, thank you both very much.